Hiya folks, it's Kikoskia here and welcome back to Writing and Me. This video contains no music or gameplay whatsoever, allowing you to put this in the background while you focus on whatever it is you're doing, be it listening to music, playing a game, doing some work, writing your own story, or trading with the potato warriors from Rigel 7. Now if you're determined to do that, let me give you a piece of advice. Be firm in your demands, but not too firm. If you push too hard, you'll anger them, and they'll likely attack you. And while they may not seem intimidating, they have numbers, and they will pop up from absolutely everywhere. But if, as I say, you're firm but not too firm, you can get away with a cracking deal and your life. Last time I spoke about world building, and today I'm going to speak about something that is equally important when it comes to creating your story. The plot. Some people think that plot is absolutely critical, the most important thing, but I rank it equally with characters and world building, though the plot is probably something that you're going to come up with before anything else. You'll be just walking down the street, or sat down thinking about a story, or washing the dishes, or any of the things that you could do in the day, and suddenly it comes to you. And you think, that is a really good idea for a story. And so you write it down, as I said that you should do if you ever come up with a good idea, and it is there. A sentence, maybe two, maybe a small paragraph if you just get into the flow of translating what's in your head down into written form. And then you stare at it, and you think, okay, I've got this. Now what do I do? That plot can become all manner of things. A limitless amount of possibilities can spring up from that single idea. The only problem is, if you write about a limitless string of ideas, your plot really isn't going to have much cohesion, and the story isn't going to go anywhere. You need a flow. You need a destination for your story to head to. Which is why I always try to plan things out at least vaguely. You don't need to have the entire plot all scheduled out into the minutiae before you start. You can have a beginning, rough ideas about the middle, and the end. Having the end is quite important because you know what you're aiming for, and you can use that as your basis to begin writing. That said, don't take what you've written there as set in stone, because, much like world building, and much like characters, which we'll talk about another time, things will change, and do things change when it comes to plot. I can tell you, but the thing I'm writing did not start out as it is now. It has changed a lot since I began all those years ago. It's undergone many different drafts, and each major draft has basically rewritten the whole thing. Aspects of plot have disappeared, new things have been added in, and if you went from the very first draft to the one I'm currently working on, you would question if these stories were the same thing. But they are. Now, what do you need in a plot? Well, you need the setup to begin with. You need the situation to be presented to the person reading. This can be done in a lengthy manner or an extremely brief manner. It all depends on how it starts. Stories that start with action immediately tend not to have a lot of initial setup, but you will eventually explain things thanks to the story progressing and the world building that you are doing at the same time as writing, or that you did before. All depends on how you build the world. Anyway, once you've got the initial setup, you then present a problem. All stories have a problem at their core, something that needs to be overcome. Now, this does not have to be something world-shattering. Not every story has to be about saving the world, or the universe, or the human race, or the Blagal race, or whatever characters you have as the focus. Whether you're writing an epic tale that spans thousands of years and countless star systems, or you're writing about a man who just got fired from the post office, there are problems that need to be defeated. And so you go from the setup, to the problem, to complications, as people attempt to solve the problem. There will always be complications that arise. The complications could be linked to the problem itself. The complications could be different problems all their own, because your characters do not exist in a vacuum. things are happening all around them. Of course, they actually could be in space, and thus they do exist in a vacuum, but they're not actually in the vacuum. But I digress. Remember in the previous videos when I said that I could waffle and go off on a tangent? That was me about to do so just then, but cunningly, I ensnared myself and pulled myself back to the topic at hand. And I nearly went on a tangent just then, but I didn't. Anyway, the world around the character will have its impact, and this is where the world building comes in. Sometimes that impact is good, sometimes that impact is bad, but either way, things will be going on even as you're trying to resolve the main issue. And at the end of the story, eventually, hopefully, the problem will be solved. Sometimes the problem won't be solved, and you will have a downer ending as things go bad. Or potentially things go good, because that problem may not necessarily be something bad happening, because for all I know, your main character could be the villain trying to make something awful occur, and at the end, the villain gets thwarted, and the good guys win. But the good guys aren't the main character, but that is diverging into characters, and we're focusing on plot. There usually is a resolution of the problem, at least somewhat, by the end of the story. If you're planning to have more stories that follow on from this, not everything needs to be solved. You will have loose threads anyway that weren't solved, but you can leave things hanging somewhat. Not everything, but some things, so that you can carry things on. It is generally a good idea for there to be a resolution, so that the reader finishes reading and is satisfied that there is a end. A definitive end. So they can close the book and go, it's over. But there was this. And then they go back and they read a bit more, go to page 27 and go, that thing! But they didn't solve that! What are they going to do? And then you have your sequel hook. But, again, diversion. So you've spent all this time coming up with this basic plot thread that your characters and the world will follow, and you decide, I'm going to ask someone for advice on this. It's not a bad idea to ask people for advice. I would recommend, of course, that you share this information with people that you trust to keep this information to themselves, but I digress. You have presented your plot to someone, and potentially a bit of the world building. And what can happen is that they listen and then they go, oh, so it's just like X then. And you sit there and you think, oh, the plot sort of is a little bit like that. It shares a lot of themes and a general, And then you go, you sure it's like that? And you go, yeah, it's pretty much like that, vaguely. And then you go away and think, did I just copy them? Did I? And the answer is most likely, no. No, you didn't. Do not be worried about this, because of the next important thing I'm about to tell you. There are only so many basic plots out there. By basic plots, I mean types of story. There are only so many of them. Many stories focus on one of them, or a combination of 2 or 3, but there are only so many story types. And let me tell you, throughout the years, every kind of story has been written, and written again, and written again, and again. You will not find something that is absolutely truly unique. And that is not a bad thing, because it is not the vague general plot that is important. What is important is what you do with it. The world you build, the characters you make, and the twists and turns that you put in the story. Only you can do that. And that is what makes the story uniquely yours. So don't be disheartened if somebody goes, that's just like that in terms of plot, because you're going to make it your own. Of course, if you do decide to write something that is based in a world that is already in existence, and is somebody else's intellectual property, that is something completely different. And if you do plan to publish that, you are most certainly going to have to seek permission from the original creator of it. Unless it is something that is in the public domain, something that is so old that it has passed beyond being owned by any one person. You can quite happily make a sequel to Alice in Wonderland, because Alice in Wonderland is public domain. There are many stories, however, that you can't just decide you're going to write a sequel to, and publish, and make money off, not without getting the go-ahead first. So be mindful of that. But don't let that stop you write something. If you want to write a fanfiction story about a world that already exists, go ahead and do it. Just keep that in mind if you plan to go beyond just writing it. I now want to talk about something that's very important about plots, and that is that you need to keep it under control. That's not to say that you should avoid changing anything, because as I said before, no plot is set in stone. Things will change. What I'm talking about is that you have this beginning and you have the end goal. And you do want to be aiming for that end goal. You're not going to be served by starting off here, going off on this tangent, and then that tangent, and then this tangent, and then that tangent, and before you know it, you don't have an end in sight. You don't have a flow. Your river of story has gone off into countless tiny little streams that then trickle away into even smaller puddles, and none of them lead to the end. Your story has petered out because you have gone too wide. And that is a danger when you are developing a story that you want to try and avoid. And you do that by keeping that end goal in front of you at all times. It may be a long way away. It may be beyond many twists and turns as sudden plot twists occur that the characters have to react to. It may be behind other, more minor problems that you need the characters to overcome, or circumvent, or just have happen to them and then they just carry on, dealing with the ramifications of the problem. But that end goal is a great driving force to keep your story and its flow constant. That's not to say that you shouldn't be prepared to abandon that end goal if, when you're writing the story, you find a better one that makes more sense. If you see that the story is going in a different direction and the end that you originally envisioned will not happen, do not be afraid to divert the flow of the story to follow the path that the river wants to head down. Because that is very important as well. You don't want to force yourself to go to an ending that ultimately doesn't make sense just because it was the ending that you originally thought out. Sometimes the plot does not go the way you expect it to. In fact, replace the word sometimes with pretty much all the time the plot does not go the way you expect it to. But you're doing yourself a disservice if you forcibly try to get the plot to go in the direction of that initial ending. You want the reading to be natural. You don't want people to suddenly look at it and go, "Oh, wait, what?" And then they read back and try and find where the clues were to lead to this, and there aren't any. Sometimes that does happen in a story, very rarely, suddenly something comes out of nowhere, but that is definitely jarring when it happens. You have the heroes epically fighting, and they're about to win, and then suddenly a monster from out of space that has eyes where there are teeth, and teeth where there are eyes, and tentacles where there are teeth, just swoops down and eats them. There's no foreshadowing whatsoever, but because you were so focused on, and then the flying monster with teeth and eyes and tentacles and teeth decides to eat everyone, you've made that the ending, even though the ending was actually leading towards the heroes being victorious, and fighting the evil villain on his volcano gun, and him then falling into the volcano gun going, "Curses! Foiled by my own hubris!" And then they're gone. That story, long before you reach that point, will have been screaming, "This is not the story for the giant monster from outer space, which has teeth where there are eyes, and eyes where there are teeth, and tentacles where there are teeth." Save that for the sequel, or write something completely different. But you will have seen the clues that that is not how it should end, and you should heed them. Does that mean you need to heed that every single time something is going to happen like that? Not necessarily is the answer. There will sometimes be an immutable event, but you will know that this event is immutable, and so you will have written in preparation for that, even if the plot veers in a slightly different direction. If you know that this thing will happen, you will make it work. The ending, however, you've got to be a lot more careful with, because the ending is how you ultimately leave the reader. And if your ending is the monster from out of nowhere, and it makes no sense, and it's there just because you really wanted that monster to be there, the plot be darned, you will leave your readers unsatisfied, and that does not bode well for them reading things in the future. It's a difficult thing to work through that part, keeping the end goal in mind, but also remembering that it's not immutable, but also remembering that some events will be immutable. It takes a lot of practice to get that down, knowing what things you're going to have to change, and knowing what things you are definitely not going to change. But you will get it eventually. Practice makes perfect after all, and the more practice you get, the better. You will go through a lot of drafts of your story. Of that I can assure you. You will start with your first draft and you'll be like, this is good. And then eventually you'll have a second draft, and then a third draft, and then a fourth draft. I'm definitely on to the fifth or sixth draft with some stories. And that is no bad thing when it comes to refining your story, making it better. But there's one thing I want to leave you with, and that is, do not overwork it. There will come a point when you look at your story and go, yes, this is done. Done. You have gone over the story again and again, you've found typos and you've found grammatical errors, you've changed one or two very minor things, and you are done. It's very important at that point to put the story down. Because there is such a thing as overworking a plot, over-tweaking your world building, and changing too many things about a character. You can overwork a story to the point that you ruin it. And it's difficult to know when you've reached that point. The one piece of advice I can give you for that is, if you are struggling to change things, if you are going over this desperately trying to find something to change, with this burning desire that something else needs to be fine-tuned, and you just haven't found it yet, even though you've gone over the story twice already, stop. You have got to the point where your plot, your world building, your characters, they have been refined all they can be. Other people, of course, can look at it, and you can get an outside perspective later from an editor once you're looking to get it published, but you are not going to be able to do anything now to that, except potentially make it worse. And that is a very difficult lesson. That lesson is probably more difficult than anything else I've just stated in this video. You do need to learn when to stop. And it is so hard to do so. Trust me, I failed many a time to stop with things, and some of my stories are just way too overworked now. The only way that I could fix them is to pretty much start all over again. But that leads into something else, very minor, which is have multiple saves. Have the save of the first draft, have the save for the second draft, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth. Then you have those earlier versions to go back to if you want to get things from them, or if you want to revert something back to how it was, or check details that you may have deleted in a later draft that you need to consult. Don't have just one version of your story that you keep editing over and saving over. And also, have multiple versions of the one you're working on, because if something goes wrong and you lose the file you're working on, that can be a lot of work that disappears into the ether. But if you do have multiple saves of all those drafts in different locations, it's much less likely that's going to happen. And thus I end on a massive tangent. But hey, when was that not going to happen? And so, folks, when we come back, we've spoken about writing in general, we've spoken about world building, and we've spoken about some things concerning the creation of a plot. Next time, we're going to speak about characters, the other pillar that your story will be resting upon. World building, plot, and characters. And my, is there quite a bit to talk about when it comes to characters. And I'll do my best to make sure that it all makes sense. No promises, but I'll try. And so, I'll catch you next time, folks, and I'll see you then. Later.